I wanted to do something a little bit different and talk about some of the games I've been playing lately in a short, off-the-cuff format. Most of the time I just don't have much to say about a game even after playing it for dozens of hours. Conversely, some games can be extremely short and still leave a lasting impression. I figured since I tend to play quite a few games, it might be fun to share some thoughts on a few, and you can get an impression for yourself to see if it's worth trying. What a cool game. It's essentially Dead Rising with vampires, and it pulls off an endearing little adventure. You run around to various areas, collecting items and rescuing villagers from the monster threat, while simultaneously fighting off enemies and vampires. If an NPC dies, they're dead for good, and it will affect multiple things, such as the items you can receive or even the ending. I played with an English translation patch, and some of the typos and stuff were hilarious, albeit pretty confusing to figure out where to go. You get to play as multiple characters, and some switch-ups are required to get certain survivors. It can be a little hard to figure out what to do at times, and unfortunately survivors are very easy to kill, making this a slightly frustrating experience. The concept and execution is respectable though, and I recommend checking it out if you're curious. Originally I was going to do a full review of this one, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I just don't have that much to say. I've heard this game praised to the high heavens by many reviews that I've read, but I guess I just don't feel that way. It's a tedious and boring game with nothing really to do outside of just running around killing dudes. You can level up your characters, but aside from the skills, you don't really feel any different except for being able to kill a little faster and survive more damage. The story isn't bad, but it's corny and it has a lot of weird stuff to it. It's really hard to describe what makes this game so boring, but it has a lot to do with the long cutscenes when you perform special moves and the repetitive button mashing. There are some combos that allow you to switch things up, but you'll quickly find that some are objectively better than others, so you find yourself doing the same inputs over and over again. I still say give it a shot to see if it's for you, since a lot of people seem to like this game. It has a good art style most of the time, and there's some good music in here. The game itself though is just kinda bleh. This right here is one of those games that you play and want to love to death, but there's something holding you back from praising it. This game looks phenomenal, the music is on point, the level design is there, and the world feels open and believable. However, there are so many brick walls in the way to keep you from experiencing that world that you will need a goddamn wrecking ball to make any progress. The combat is annoying in the way that the enemies are attacking you relentlessly, but you're not equipped properly to be fighting them. Healing is a chore, sub-weapons don't even get good until like 15 hours into the game, and your melee attack is pathetic. Sure, you can unlock new techniques and get better gear, but good luck with that because the economy is so broken I couldn't even afford Town 2 gear when I was in Town 3. Enemies drop a pitiful amount of money, and so do chests. The only thing you can do is either grind or fish and harvest food to sell for pennies on the dollar because you dyed your hair too many times and now you can't afford to upgrade your armor. I hate that I don't like this game because it nails most of the aspects of a game like this that I would want to see. It's just so rough to get through because of some of the design choices, and that's super annoying because the sense of exploring you get in this game is insane. The puzzles are well designed and reward you for being curious and experimental, except for a few which are just straight up lame. Try it if you want, but just know that this is an extremely slow paced game that demands that you pore over it. In my case, that's just not for me. Her broom is her gun. Need I say more? This game is hilariously bad. Like, it's barely a game sometimes with all of the ridiculously huge environments with nothing in them. The level design is just so stitched together, it feels like playing an alpha build of something still in development. However, there are so many cool ideas in here that it's a goddamn shame that Bullet Witch didn't get the time, budget, and team to make it what it should have been. Your broom turns into different guns, and you can upgrade it with currency that you earn. You get magic spells which are incredibly devastating, and I can't believe they're legal to run on a console with how much they must make your CPU overheat. The tornado is absolutely insane. You don't really do a whole lot outside of running around large areas looking for targets to kill, and there's definitely a lot of jank and half-baked mechanics that just make the game come off as cheap. I'd love to see this idea revisited, but be a bit more fleshed out because the idea is so cool there's glimmers of good in the mess of a game presented. This is another one I was going to do a full video on, but decided not to because I realized that as a game, Dragon's Dogma can be a frustrating and nonsensical journey, but the experience that you get from playing this game is unlike anything I've ever had. It reminds me a lot of the first time I played Oblivion back in the day. You have this large, fantastical world to explore, but you're railroaded so hard that you will miss out on everything cool if you don't explore on your own terms. The sheer magnitude of variables and interesting mechanics at play demands that you try out new and interesting things. Hell, you can even duplicate magical quest items and turn in the wrong ones so that you can keep the buffs, and this will be reflected later in cutscenes. That's so friggin' cool. Not to mention all the crazy things that happen in post-game and all the battle variables, from finding interesting ways to take down enemies to just straight up grabbing onto a chimera's tail and riding him into the sky. This game is a pain to play, I can assure you of that. It's janky and annoying, but goddamn if it isn't one of the most memorable RPG journeys I've ever been on. I haven't even scratched the surface of how cool this game is because I want you to experience it for yourself. Ignore the main quest, go do cool stuff. When it comes down to it, Fantasy Life isn't much of a game, it's more of a minigame grind. You're constantly playing minigames to fish or cut wood or make new clothes, but what's crazy is that it actually works. All of the different jobs have different tasks that you need to accomplish, but they come together in a way that contributes to both the plot of the game and the overall gameplay itself. Starting off, you feel extremely limited because you can't cut wood until you become a woodcutter, but then you might see a big fish and want to catch it, but you can't because you haven't started the fishing life yet. This draws you to try out new jobs and see what kind of things you can do in the world, and as you level up and complete tasks, more things open up to you to the point where you're scouring the world looking for the baddest monsters, the biggest fish, and even more menacing of rocks to mine. The story ties together everything, but it's very knee-slap comedy, and while it's endearing, it comes off as a bit childish. I don't feel this detracts from the game though, and if you're willing to put in a little bit of effort to build your skills, you can have a hell of a lot of fun in this game. There's so much to do, and your character actually has a sense of growth in them where all of the accumulated skills work in conjunction to make you feel like the time invested was worth it. This game sets up an impressively dreary atmosphere, only to ruin it with terrible shooting mechanics and laughable scene transitions. You get knocked out like 6 times, and your weapon's taken away like 3 times, and I'm not even joking, that count might be low. I love how unsettling the city feels, and when you talk to citizens, you just feel like such an outsider, and there's so many secrets being kept. Also, the psychological effects are really cool because your screen will blur, or you'll hear voices, and your controls will be messed up, but this also works against you because it can happen in combat and ruin any semblance of aim you thought you had. I couldn't even beat this game without hacking it because in the final section, you need to get through an escape sequence, but for whatever reason on my system, it would just kill me before I got to the end, even if I performed perfectly. So I ended up having to triple my running speed and give myself God mode just to be able to see the ending. I feel like this would have been a great puzzle adventure game, but they decided to make it a shooter, and the game suffers greatly for that because the world and atmosphere is incredible. This is a novel concept for sure. It's essentially a kind of urban legend where if you played the game, you die 7 days later, but it goes a bit deeper than that. The story unfolds as you play and things become more clear as to what is going on. The concept itself is neat because DSs exist in-game and it feels slightly more believable that you may indeed be playing a cursed cartridge. The game flips between 2 main playstyles, where one is a Dragon Quest style game within the game, and the other is a first-person exploration game with some tense ambience. It's a bit of a slog, but it's very straight to the point, somewhat in the vein of a walking simulator, but it has a lot of heart to it, and to talk about it in depth would be detracting from the experience. The atmosphere is thick and genuinely unsettling despite its low-res graphics. The music and sounds come together to make you feel very uneasy. My only main complaint with the game is that not everything is examinable. Mostly only story important objects are. I would have loved to examine mundane objects and get your main character to describe things to immerse yourself further into the world. You know, I honestly thought I would have more to say about this one. I love the first 2 games, and I still hold them in high regard as some of the best survival horror games made to date because of the incredible world building and the mood they pull off. Silent Hill 3, however, while a great game in its own right, just doesn't really do it as much for me. I think the main problem is that the first half of the game just doesn't really have much direction. The characters are only mildly interacted with, and you just run from point to point with some shooting in between. It's only in the second half of the game, after Heather returns to her apartment, that things start to pick up and the ride gets wild. They tied this game back to the first Silent Hill very well, and the lore-related stuff and the uneasiness of the character performances makes things incredibly unsettling and cool. It's a good game. I love the Yakuza series, and this game is no different. It's just as ridiculous as you would expect, because they're trying to tell a serious Yakuza story with all the crazy situations that come with people being infected in an over-the-top manner. You get to see a lot of familiar characters and settings, and it feels right at home to be blasting zombies 1 second and then declaring Ricci and Mahjong the next. The main issues are the gameplay, however. The controls are rough for this style of game, the frame rate chugs constantly. There's some fun aspects to the combat, but ultimately there's very little variety outside of the different guns you can get. Even something as awesome as watching Kiryu try and fight zombies with his bare hands is kind of ruined when they force him to use a gun. It's not a terrible game, but you definitely need to set your expectations low going into this one. This is the definition of a missed potential game. The art style and music are so good, with a fairly competent fighting system to back it up. The problem lies in the repetitive nature of the game, where a lot of battles play out in a very button-mashing kind of slog. What makes things worse is that half of your moveset is locked behind finding collectibles, and if you don't pick up all 5 in a level, you don't get anything. Some of the bosses can be kind of annoying too, because they come down to gimmicky puzzles instead of being tests of skill that you've acquired along the way. Not to mention the frame rate tanks constantly and really ruins what is otherwise a spectacle of a game. The way you fight and how everything flows with the music just feels so good. When it works really well, and you'll be surrounded with a torrent of limbs and sliced off heads before you know it. I just really wish that it were a bit more polished in terms of bugs and some frustrating mechanics. This one was on my to-do list for a while. I picked it up a long time ago and just never really got around to trying it until now. It's a very strange game with an interesting murder mystery story. The visuals on display are insanely good for PS3, and all of the environments look incredible. There's some cool cutscenes too. The combat is a little lacking, however, and makes for a somewhat stilted experience. You capture monsters and assign them to the face buttons in order to use their abilities. Some are objectively better than others, and a lot of them have very similar styles of attack. There's elemental attacks too, but these only really come into play during boss fights, which need to be executed in a specific way dictated by the storybook fragments you find. You have 2 characters to choose from, and they both see different perspectives of the story and interact with each other to progress. Sadly, you need to replay the same levels 5 times per character to get the ending, and this can be pretty boring. I do think the story and artwork shine through the shortcomings, and it's worth a play just to see what happens next. It's just a slow experience and can be a bit annoying at times because of things like motion controls used to absorb enemies and bosses. Check it out for sure, but understand that there's a lot of frustrating moments before you'll see the credits. With all that said, I hope you find something you might enjoy checking out. I'll probably end up doing more of these videos, but I find for a lot of games that I've played lately, I just don't have that much to talk about. There's a ton of interesting games out there. Sometimes you just have to hunt a little for them.